Gupta, how are you?
Very well.
How's the week going?
Same as every week.
There's got to be interesting things going on, man. Tell me, at least enlighten me a little bit. What's the most interesting thing that happened to you over the last couple of weeks?
Just the solidification of the fact that isolation is so critical in this world.
Why? Because our minds get polluted by the environment and the people around us. But for you, what is it that really stimulates that?
Minds get polluted by interaction. Minds get polluted by interaction because with interaction comes posturing. With interaction comes, sending forth one's self-image as a surrogate, and that creates the influx of ego, and that creates further complication. I think when a person is isolated, there's enough of a complexity in the form of self-image and ego to keep one occupied for the rest of his life without having to, bring more complexity into the fray.
How does that stuff not affect you? How does the poison of the thinking of other people, and I'm with all due respect to some of these other people, but I'm just saying in general, how do you not let that impact you?
I don't think it's about letting or not letting. I think it's all internal. It's all looking inside yourself, and it is the no matter what pursuit you're involved in, your level of devotion becomes tested. And the more your level of devotion naturally and organically is in something, then that is what will keep you from sort of entering into complexities, which if that devotion is not naturally strong, you will succumb.
Well, I want to pick up on a couple things that I learned from you over the past couple of weeks. If you're not going to share anything interesting, there are a couple things that I learned from you, from your discourses and tweets and so forth, that I want to dig a little bit deeper into. And the first one is so apropos for the world we live in today when you talk about the difference between clarity versus doubt. And I want to read the tweet and ask you a question about it. If one is driven by the hope of reward and the pleasure of favorable outcomes, he will be stricken by self-doubt. If he is at all times self-honest about the purity of his motivations, his decisions and his actions will arise from clarity. That's beautiful. Dig into that for me a little bit. I know it's about not thinking about outcomes, but I want to explore that a little bit with you.
I never said it was not thinking about outcomes. That's a sports psychology thing. That's cosmetic nonsense. It is not about not thinking about outcome. That basically means that you're forcing yourself not to think about outcomes. That's where everyone lives in the prescription world. It has nothing to do with that. It is an understanding that something that is chased for the reward is absolutely, if you chase something for a reward, first it must be cemented in your mind with hammers and nails that is not bad. And I think that there's no point in talking to any human being unless they first get past the idea of good and bad, because if they can't get past good and bad, then whatever you say will be colored by that lens, and therefore they will be running away from bad and running towards good, and game's over. So it has nothing whatsoever, I can't emphasize that enough, it has nothing whatsoever to stop thinking about outcomes. That is prescription, and that is garbage. It has everything to do with understanding that if you chase something, that thing will run from you. If you chase something, that means that you are chasing for reward. And once again, that is not bad, and it is not wrong, and it is not criminal, and it is not breaking a rule. It is just about the effect. So if I throw water on you and you get wet, that isn't bad, and that isn't good. It is just the effect. And the effect of chasing something for pleasure will create self-doubt. And the effect of chasing something, or not even chasing it, but for pursuing something for a genuine motivation and the purity of arriving at that thing, whatever it may be, for the thing itself, is not good. It is just that the effect of that will be clarity.
So if you were going into, I don't want to relate it to sports in a minute, but if you're going into an important business meeting where it's really critical that you raise a round of funding to keep your business going, what is your mindset like going into that business meeting?
Well, you're already compromised if you go in under the weight of need. It is not about the how. It is, if you have nothing and you go in because you really need something, your effectiveness will be limited.
So how are you approaching it then?
Well, salesman does, from whether he's trying to sell someone on a product or sell a product or sell someone on an idea to get funding, whatever it may be. The traditional way of looking at things is that I need to sell you on this. And what is entirely overlooked is that it has nothing to do with selling someone else. It has everything to do with selling yourself, on yourself. And if what you're touting is of limited effectiveness, or it's of not very high quality, or of limited quality, then something inside you will not be sold on it. And when something is not inside you is not sold on it, then you will be limited in how well you can sell someone else on it.
So within the context of sports, we're recording this on the weekend of the Super Bowl, and you get a lot of these athletes who are talking about, hey, I'm going to approach this just like it's another game. You and I know that that's bullshit. If one of these athletes is a friend of yours and you're talking to him about approaching that game, how are you talking to him about approaching the Super Bowl?
It's not about the approach. It's not about the approach. I'm not going to tell him how to approach it. However he approaches it, it's what he wants to learn. Does he want to learn or not?
So are you thinking about winning?
It's not about what I'm thinking about. It's not about me. Listen, Mo, there's so many things that are understood. Like if we're standing in a room, there's walls, there's paint, right? There's a ceiling. Now, any answer that I give is based upon the assumption that there's wall, there's carpet, there's paint, and there's a ceiling, right? But there's so many answers that require you to understand that there is no paint, and there is no wall, and there's no ceiling. Where do I begin, right? And so that's why some of these questions are very difficult to get across, because the understandings that are so assumed and not even questioned because they're so part of the furniture and the fabric, that where do you begin? So it isn't, for me to answer your question outright, I would have to assume the same thing that you assume.
Sure,
and,
I get it.
And the assumptions that are assumed before the question is even asked are not true. So the question comes later. First, the assumptions that you haven't even mentioned, those are what needs to be challenged. So it has nothing to do with what would I tell him, what would be my mindset, what would I want to do. If this is what you have to understand. If the guy said, I'm going to approach this as if it was a Super Bowl, you know what the answer is? Okay. If the guy says, I'm going to approach this like it was any other game, you know what the answer is? Okay. Okay. So there's no, you shouldn't approach at that. No, that doesn't work. If the person said, I'm not sure how to approach this, and I really want to approach it the most effective way, can we have a discussion about, what this really means and how the effect of approaching it one way causes this and the effect of approaching it a different way causes it that way. Now we can have a conversation. But it has to do with advice.
Let's go there. And here's the real purpose of me asking the question. There is such external pressure on a lot of these athletes to win the game. And it's very difficult for people not to succumb to that external pressure and still kind of maintain that internal desire to be the best. So what kind of advice are you giving them?
You have to filter things through your own DNA and through your own, according to what resonates with you. Some people, if they approach it through the lens of this is a Super Bowl, it creates a greater degree of motivation within them. Another person, if he approaches it the same way, it creates a greater degree of pressure within them. So it isn't about advice. It depends upon, you have to break down the individual and find out what is it about him, what inspires him, how was he made, and that dictates the direction that he goes.
So you and I talk a lot about, and I know you talk about, the idea of giving yourself permission to be great. So in your work with others, and most importantly with yourself, what prevents people from giving themselves that permission or that opportunity to be great?
The lack of desire to want to be great.
So do most of us lie to ourselves when we say, hey, of course I want to be great?
Well, the same way that they lie to themselves. Well, it's not lie. It's the same way. It's the same way as the person who says, I would love to have $10 million. He's not lying. But it's very different from a person who says, well, I'm going to go create, the world's greatest company and $10 million is going to come from that. There's different things. There's want and there's want. So I think any conversation that is centered around the masses and people is a fruitless conversation. It's catering to the lowest common denominator. And the lowest common denominator shouldn't be the part of any conversation.
So when you think about the great artists that you admire, what is it that you admire about them?
Raw desire, hunger, devotion, DNA. It's always going to be the same answer. It doesn't matter the craft.
So if I don't have a DNA and I do have that desire to be great.
If you don't have the hunger, forget it. Go home. I don't care how many books you read. You can read all the habits of, wealthy people or whatever you want to read all day long. You can literally hear one.
Right, the wealthy people.
But you can wear 14 lanyards a day. I don't care what you do. You're not going to get there. You're not, because you don't have the DNA for it. And DNA is not genetic. The DNA is the DNA of having a desire. This is about this. This is about world number ones. This is about people who want to conquer their mind. It's about people who, this is not about the common man. I don't care about the common man. The whole world succumbs and bows at the feet of the common man. I do not. I am not interested. It is boring to me. I don't want to help anybody. I'm not interested if this helps anybody. The person who is ready and ripe will automatically get helped.
Okay, and those are the people I want to talk to. Let's talk about from the 8 to 11. Are they interested in learning? How about let's answer that?
Very few. Okay. The 8 to 11, so the 8 to 11, even in those, there's a very small number who have the DNA. But since they're already in 8, they have the eligibility requirements. Okay.
Good. Right.
So there's a listen, Mo, it's sort of making light of it, but I don't think that it's understood just how much human beings have been conditioned to be average. And you're going to say that you do know, and you don't. The degree to which human beings are conditioned and have all the talent and possibility and potential sucked out of them by a certain age is astronomical.
Sure.
It is virus. It's a virus. Society is a virus. And it is precisely because it caters to the lowest common denominator that it breeds them.
I agree. And every time you and I talk about that, I become a lot more conscious of it. And that's why I asked you the question about, hey, how do you distance your mind when you're politely having a conversation with a couple of these people and you don't want to internalize it because it is poison.
Yeah, I think it's much more about carrying an umbrella than it is about stopping the rain.
This is about that deep examination that you're talking about.
Yeah, everything, all of the shields that you have, and all of the ways that you have to prevent yourself from getting tainted and significantly conditioned, all are from the inside, not from the outside.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe the relationship that Kapil Gupta has with himself?
Constant examination.
And is it constant examination of saying, hey, here's where my mind really screwed me today? Or are you in a neutral frame of mind as you're doing that examination? Are you just learning and understanding?
It's a constant examination that arises from a devotion of not being affected by the mind.
What can you give me an example of a recent situation where you faced that?
When you experience a so-called assault, let's just use that word, from the outside, who you really get assaulted by, the arrow may come from the outside, but the wound happens on the inside. And so a person can get all the arrows he wants from the outside, but if he spends his life trying to stop the arrows from the outside, he misses the boat. Because where the real money is to stop the wounds from happening on the inside. So if someone slaps you once, you slap yourself twice. So if you understand that, not intellectually, if you understand that viscerally, then your efforts will go in the direction of the prevention of you slapping yourself twice than they will in the direction of having the other person not slap you. And everyone is taught to do the opposite.
Mm-hmm. At this stage in your own evolution and your own understanding, do you ever get to a point where you feel at peace with the quest that you're on for this deep understanding?
Yeah, you have the most peace when the things that used to arise don't arise anymore. That's when you know that something is transforming.
How do you deal with emotion?
Emotion is a barometer. Emotion, when it tempers itself, then you know that something is transformed within you. I don't use it for one thing or another.
So it's not for you, you don't ever get to that place of anger, you don't get to that place of being self-critical of yourself when you feel like something didn't go well. You don't go there?
All those things arise. It is a matter of the degree to which they arise and the frequency with which they arise and the situations in which they used to arrive and no longer arrive. That is the barometer, as opposed to using them or subduing them. It is a monitoring of how much they arose and how much they would have arose before.
Are there particular emotions that you're less likely to respond or react to now that you're at this place of understanding for yourself? Do you ever get derailed?
Well, not knowing the truth about everything is derailed, So that constant devotion to finding the truth, it is a derail until you get there.
Mm-hmm. And when you find yourself stuck, for example, somebody was talking to me a little bit earlier today about just a real complex issue that they're dealing with at work, and they found themselves stuck. And it was just being in that room and feeling the emotion that they had on people was toxic. When you find yourself dealing with complex issues, for you, a lot of times it's just personal things that you're digging deep in, which is to get to that truth.
I'm going to cut you off because I'm going to forget what I'm going to say. The toxicness, first of all, of your example is that there's a group. That's the first toxicness. Okay?
Yeah, it is a group. It's about 7 or 8 people. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Nothing no truth can come from a group. Never, never in 100 million years. Never. Impossible. Can't happen. Will not happen. Does not happen. That's the first toxicity. The toxicness, as you described, isn't that your emotions are toxic to another. The very group is an assault to begin with, okay? Because whenever you have a group, there is nothing but intellectual compromise. There's posturing. There's ego. And wherever there are those things, then one's devotion is always, where they can't help it. There's no way that it's not going to be that way. Is always to those things. And whatever one's devotions and allegiance and attention is to, that means it is not in the direction of truth.
So when you're faced with an important decision as a team, how do you approach those meetings?
No way. There's no team. Each person must be hired painstakingly as a world-class, rare DNA individual to his own subspecialty within the group. Okay? And that person has to be really meticulously brought on board. And if he is deemed, the genuine person of knowledge of that particular small sub niche. As for everyone getting together and working on one problem, that works in building a house. That works in lifting a log because there's so-called teamwork because you have muscle power for me. That's fine. But in artistic or intellectual pursuits, those things, you will have many examples where people will come and say, "See, it worked." Mm-hmm. What they don't realize is they don't have the other side to where how well it could have, quote, worked if a person who had true knowledge of that thing was allowed to do it, had free reign to do what he or she wanted. Okay, that's the only way you can compare. No one can say that my life was great or this or that. The only way that you would know if you're, quote, right was if you had two lives and you did one way, one life you did one way and the other life you did the other way, then you compare. Then you have a better idea. But you only had one life, so you can't compare anything. So everyone likes to make up their own stories and make themselves feel better about see it worked and look at this. And everyone sees what they want to see and everyone hears what they want to hear.
Well, is that, and it reminds me of something you said a couple of weeks ago where you talk about that the elite never become elite because of culture. They actually become elite despite the culture.
That's
is that what
right.
You're referencing here?
Yeah, and group is culture. A company culture is that you don't have to have toxic people. The group itself is toxic. And that toxicity is limited so long as each person is, number one, painstakingly brought on board, very delicately and after extensive analysis. And then each person is allowed free reign over their particular domain because they know it better than anybody else.
So what's the leader's role then?
In a symphony, you don't have the piano player playing the guitar, right? And you have the guitar playing the saxophone. So everyone has to be an owner of their particular domain. But when each one does their thing to their utmost, then collectively what is heard is a symphony. But if each one tried to play the piano together, it doesn't work. And that would be akin to all of them trying to work on one problem together. That problem has a particular domain that it fits most neatly into. You see, rare people are rare. And so when you see, for instance, when you see these documentaries and you see, the star, the entertainer, the superstar athlete, the multi-billionaire CEO, whatever it is. And then he goes into a meeting and he goes in this super long rectangular table, right?
It's all the same.
There are too many seats at that table, okay? That table is long as Main Street, okay? All the main streets across every city in this country don't have as rare DNA people forget at one table. That's what isn't. See, the degree to which rareness is rare is not understood. If you took all the boardrooms of the top companies across the entire world, right, you might find 4 people who have extraordinarily rare DNA who can truly make the rest of them. And those 4 people, unless they have true and free reign, they own the company and they can do whatever they want. Typically, they reign with an iron fist, which is effective, not democracy and kumbaya, all right, and conscious capitalism, all this crap, all right, this nonsense, spirituality nonsense. This is a road to mediocrity. Those people are drowned out by the majority of the mediocre. So this whole world is totally backwards, and the degree to which it is backwards is unfathomable.
So what do you see the role of a leader today?
To be the leader of himself first.
And just let that example be?
Well, a person who has most ownership of himself, and whatever your word is, self-realization, ownership, whatever the word is, that person's decisions will reflect that. That person's behaviors will reflect that. That person's, the moves that he makes in the company will reflect that. Everything is a reverberation of that one center. If that is compromised, then that person will have no choice but to settle for prescriptions and behavior modifications and hiring, all these business coaches to teach them how to behave and what to say, because there's no center.
So would you abolish all meetings if you were running company X? Would you not have meetings with your executives?
If I was the owner of a company and I truly wanted to create a truly exceptional company, I would have the least number of employees I possibly could, first of all. Now, where their manpower is required, yeah, that's fine. That's manpower. You can hire as many of that as you want. But as far as the decision making, it's all about iron fist. It's all about uncompromise, not compromise. It's all opposite. It's all the things that no one wants to say because it's not popular. It doesn't fit into the lanyard conferences. It doesn't sound nice on stage. Okay, so everyone in this world, Mo, their allegiance, even more than to their own company, is to how they look.
I agree. Sure.
Every human being is more concerned with how they appear than they will lose billions before they compromise how they appear.
Sure.
That's how central self-image is. So the real truths about the central nature of a human being and where true decisions come from and where true success and devotion and purity and effectiveness in any endeavor comes from, there is no one talking about it. No one is talking about these things. They're all talking about all the nonsensical fringe stuff like behavior change, and then that's because no one has a center. So since everyone is blind, they all need 17 seeing eye dogs.
Well, you've shared with me, and we've even obviously shared it on these podcasts several times, about how the masters are the ones who are spending their time understanding the true nature of the game. In this context, is the game the business? Within this leadership context, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, in business, obviously, yes, the game would be in sports. The game would be the sport, but yes.
Mm-hmm. And so from a leadership perspective, what am I trying to in addition to mastering myself? What else do I need to master in order to have the type of impact that you're describing on the people of that company, the few that have, that rare DNA that work with me?
You master yourself. What's left?
So that's the game.
That's the game within the game. So the game would be the business itself, or the pursuit, or the sport, or the whatever that would be the game. And the game within the game would be the mastery of the self. But even before you go to the mastery of the self, even if we stick with the big game for a minute, it is about understanding what the big game even is. So forget the mastery of the self. Even the big game is not being understood. Everyone is playing according to the rules that have already been made. Everyone is playing in the world of competition. Everyone, that's why there's parity. Everyone is asking the questions that are already being asked. No one's asking new questions. No one's disrupting the game. They are entering into the boxing ring to fight the fight that's already being fought. And that's why true, genuine, rare companies and rare legendary athletes, it's rare. It is not a product of lack of talent or in the business world, lack of intellect. It is a product of having fallen hook, line, and sinker for the culture and not having understood your particular game.
Have you ever had an experience where you were in the presence of an individual that you would call a master, a leader like that, who was surrounded by a few of these lieutenants who really had that rare DNA and that desire to seek that understanding that you're talking about? Have you ever experienced that?
That type of person is so rare to forget not be conditioned. We'll leave that alone. But to have the insight and the longing to cleanse himself of his conditioning, that DNA itself is extraordinarily rare. Extraordinarily rare. The culture is too strong. The culture, society and the world and the culture is a very powerful place. It's an unrelenting tide.
It is an unrelenting tide. If you're having a conversation with a group of leaders and they're asking you what your suggestion is to try to inject that type of thinking in at least their key people, what would you talk to them about?
What key people? The key people is them. Who's more than themselves?
I'm asking, how do I start to develop a culture that goes this deep, that has that level of commitment to understanding?
You want direct truth?
Yeah.
You won't do it because this hasn't become part of your DNA. You will only be doing it secondhand. Therefore, you can only do it prescriptively no matter how hard you try.
When will you recognize that it is part of somebody's DNA?
Right now, we were talking about you.
Mm-hmm. What can you see? Tell me. Let's stick to me.
Right now, you would hear it from me, and then you would pass it on. And I'm saying that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. And believe me, a couple of weeks ago, that hit me between the eyes, and it connected with me. Right? Am I there yet? Of course not, but I'm getting it.
You're getting it intellectually, but I don't think that's even worth talking about. Because this is going to turn into a conversation of well, how can you get that DNA?
No, it won't.
Okay, there's no point. There's no point. It's not going to happen. In fact, I recommend that no one talk about what I say to people that they know, because they're going to think it's so off the wall, that it's so antithetical and so against everything that they know, that they're going to discount it right at the beginning. So I tell people to stay quiet, much less do the opposite. So this idea of that you're going to now impart this to the people, it's not a question of your intelligence or your knowledge or your ability. It has nothing to do with that. It's wiring, man. It's wiring. It's how a human being is naturally wired, and it isn't about getting better at it so that you can. It's not about that. It has to come. Everything has to come from the horse's mouth. That's why I think it's frankly malpractice for let's say a person becomes a great coach, let's say a sports coach, and then he starts an academy, and then he has assistant coaches who teach his system. That's malpractice. They can't teach his system. They're just a bunch of mules. All they do is they read his nonsense, and they're going to pass it on because, quite frankly, it's never about the information. It's something about the DNA of the giver. And if you remove the giver and all you have is the information, then all you have is snakeskin. It doesn't go anywhere. It's the whole package. So it's never about pass this information along. Those people who were mesmerized by Jesus, they weren't mesmerized just by his words, because the 10 Commandments and then Buddha's Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. Those are all over the place, right? In every library and every right. What have they done? They haven't done anything, because it wasn't about dumbing down the concepts and passing it on like a cheat sheet. It was about the Buddha himself. It was the package of him. Yes, him saying those things, but there was something about the himness, right? That the packaging of it and the resonance of the voice and the answering the requisite questions that came. It wasn't just the passing on of the information, which is what you're asking me, and that's not going to work.
When did you personally recognize that you're ready yourself to make that shift to that level of seriousness, to make that shift to be that rare master that we're talking about?
Well, because
was there something that happened to you, or was this?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, these questions about the when, I don't know. They don't really go anywhere because no one really knows the answer. But I don't even want to say this because it's going to come across as a competition, because that's the lens through which everyone looks at things. I have never met someone as devoted and serious as me.
Mm-hmm. No, I believe that, sure.
In these particular things. And I will hail from the rooftops that isn't a good thing. I'm not proud of that, right? I don't want a prize for that. That's not great. It's nothing. And the reason that there's no prize for me is because that wasn't my choice. It happened to me. It was a chosenness. So I can't take credit. These things just came to me. When I have to answer a question on Twitter or to you or to a client or on the field or in a sticky situation or at a critical part of the match, whatever it is, I don't go with my own knowledge. It just comes. If it didn't come, then I wouldn't be able to answer questions so rapidly. I'm just reciting. I'm not creating.
But is it a heightened level of awareness that allows you to hear these messages or have these things come through you?
It is a heightened level of devotion, seriousness, and sincerity. And any person, and I'm not the only one, there have been many people who have been sincere and devoted before me. And those people who were, it is all the same. When you develop and when you demonstrate a level of sincerity and seriousness and genuineness, the universe, you tend to prove to the universe that you are a worthy vessel, and things just flow into you because you have demonstrated that degree of seriousness, sincerity, genuineness, devotion, purity, whatever it is, in that particular domain. That's the way it works.
And do you find that happens more likely when somebody's dealing with a really serious crisis, that our back is so against the wall that there's no turning back?
No, I think that's conflating two things. I mean, when someone's back against the wall, that is the situation in which a person does become serious, but he tends to become serious only for so long as his back is against the wall. And all the promises that he made that he won't ever do it again, once it's over, he will do it again. So this is much more of a long-term fundamental DNA seriousness as opposed to a situational one.
Mm-hmm. All right, so two more things for you, and we'll just stick on this for a moment. When you yourself are working with people, do you get a sense of when they're ready?
I've never met anyone who had that level of seriousness. But those people absolutely exist. As you can see from, the Rembrandts, the Picassos, and some of the sports legends that have gone and, years and years ago, obviously they exist. Mm-hmm. Absolutely exist.
And going back to what we were talking about, this whole idea of permission. We're just as a society, as human beings, as people who are devoted to thinking that we want to get better, we're just not ready for the truth, I guess.
Well, you can't be ready for the truth if what you want is to get better.
What's the alternative?
Arriving at the ultimate or nothing, whatever the ultimate is for you. See, everyone has been sold so many bills of goods that they don't know which way is up anymore. If you have a house filled with 14,000 things, all those 14,000 are all the bills of goods that society has sold you. So all 14,000 will have to be jettisoned first, and a big bonfire will have to happen before one, zeroes himself out to now be ready for the truth. Because what's someone going to say when they hear, well, because you're focused on getting better, you can't be serious and you can never learn the truth? That is so antithetical. How is a person understand that? That sounds insane. And the truth will always sound insane to someone who believes in society.
So what prevents people from seeing that truth?
Never having heard that message, and most are never going to have the DNA to inculcate that message, but some will. But when the only voice you hear is one voice, which is society's voice, the culture's voice, and the motivational speaker, and the priest, and the mindfulness expert, and the meditation instructor, and the Buddhist, and the Christian, and the whatever. When that's all you hear, then there really is very little opportunity, except for the rarest DNA guy who knows that that's wrong out of the box. Okay, that guy's, he's already open to knowing that that's wrong or they're ineffective. But those who could have been turned, those who had the DNA to be turned, they're out of luck because that's the only voice they ever heard. My voice is very small, Mo. I'm a quarter of a drop of water compared to the ocean of society, right? I mean, I'm one person versus, 20 million who are spouting the complete opposite.
Exactly. But that's what I appreciate about you, and that's what a whole lot of people who follow you appreciate.
The point is that the very possibility of everyone hearing these words is minute. It's not going to happen. Everyone, I'm a very small microphone.
So one last thing, and then we'll kind of pause this. You don't read a whole lot about other people. You don't follow a whole lot of people. You don't listen to the advice of anybody. On this quest of truth for you, do you ever kind of think about right or wrong, or do you just go?
Why would I think about right and wrong? So you think it's wrong, the way you asked the question and the tone of your voice and the way that your voice rose at a 45-degree angle in the first part of the sentence, leveled off.
Hey man, I love how you make a hell of a play-by-play person.
Okay,
Go ahead.
That demonstrates that you think it's wrong that I don't think of right and wrong. And
no, I really don't. I'm curious.
The 45-degree angle doesn't happen. That isn't a genuine question. That's a comment masquerading as a question with a question mark retrofitted on the end of it. Why would I think about right and wrong when right and wrong is exactly the barrier?
Well, see, I didn't think of that. That's why I asked, right? I didn't think of that. That's defining in and of itself. You just saying that.
Yeah, but it won't go anywhere because you have to take it on belief, and there's no point in taking it on belief. It is precisely the subscribing to right and wrong, good and bad, correct and incorrect, that keeps one from knowing the truth.
All right, I've too many thoughts going into my mind, so we can hit a pause on this one, and thank you for continuing.